Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa, and on this one, we'll be covering new music from The Weeknd, Frankie Cosmos, and Dunes. Well guys, welcome to the show. If you're not familiar with Sonic Discovery, what I do is basically go through all the different albums that come out every Friday, because there's a ton, and I give a few of them a listen, and I review them here. So instead of you trying to figure out what's out there, what should I check out, just click play on the show and I'll let you know what I think on a few albums. Starting off this episode, we'll be going through a new release from The Weeknd. This is called My Dear Melancholy. Now this just kind of came out as a surprise. He just a few days ago announced that he was going to be releasing new music and then a new album, but it's not a full length. This is actually an EP, and I don't usually discuss EPs on the show, but I mean, it's The Weeknd, so he's a big star. If you're not familiar with The Weeknd, he's had two really big albums, 2015's Beauty Behind the Madness and 2016's Starboy. Both of those albums produced big hits, but what we find on this one is more of a moody, darker sound, and you can definitely get that on both of those releases I just mentioned, but when you go back to his earlier work, the three mixtapes that he released earlier in his career that are kind of known as the trilogy, they're more in line with that sound, where it's very moody, still talking about girls, still talking about drugs, and that's exactly where we find him on this release. I thought the album was overall okay. Nothing too special going on with the production. The subject matter, we kind of know what to expect from The Weeknd. But let's highlight some of the tracks now. The opening track, Call Out My Name, actually uses a sample from his own song, Earned It, which was on the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. Here he's talking about a girl that didn't quite give him a chance, although he stood there by her side through the tough times. A lot of people have been asking, about who could this girl be, but it's really not a mystery that most of these songs are probably about Selena Gomez, which was his latest fling. Try Me also has a very similar moody production, but this time also incorporating more trap beats provided by Mike Will Made It and Mars, as he's trying to convince a former lover to give him another chance. Wasted Times was actually a highlight for me on this EP. This features production from Frank Dukes and Skrillex, and we hear a skipping sound on the beat, which I really enjoyed, and also a throb that I was pretty fond of. Here he's reminiscing about a former love and wondering who she could be with now. Although he's having these thoughts, he understands that he really has no business feeling this way. On I Was Never There, we get some featured production from Gesellfenstein, as we get very similar moody sounds, but here there is a piercing synth line that keeps things interesting in the song. Also, if you listen to it through headphones, there are some pretty interesting things happening in the mix. Here he talks of having to numb his pain after this breakup. The next track, Hurt You, also features production from Gesellfenstein, but also samples some of the songs that he worked on with Daft Punk on his previous album, Starboy. So there's a good sound coming through on the production, but the lyrics here have some cringe-worthy moments. And then the album closes with Privilege, which is a mellower track that gives us some eerie synth lines over a minimal beat. And here he's addressing having to take pills to numb his pain. And in this case, he has 2 red pills to take the blues away. Overall, this definitely was more aligned with his earlier work with the moodier production and not very much of the pop sound that he's known for now. But still, those lyrics, I've heard it all before. If you've heard one Weeknd song, it seems like you've heard the rest. And for this, I'm going to give it a score of a 6.5 out of 10. So if you like The Weeknd, definitely check this out. It's only 20 minutes long. If you want to hear some good material by The Weeknd, then I recommend you go check out those earlier mixtapes that he released. Next up for review, we have the third album from Frankie Cosmos. This is called Vessel. Now, Frankie Cosmos is the stage name for Greta Klein. And she is an artist that has been around for a while. She's released tons of material on Bandcamp. And this is her third full-length album. This is a band, though. She is the main songwriter for the band, but she is supported by a band. And at one point, she was also the bassist for the band Porches, which had an album that came out earlier this year. The interesting thing about this album is that it's really short. It's 33 minutes, but yet in there, she's able to fit 18 tracks. Only a few kind of get up to the 3-minute mark. I think maybe 3 of them do. Most of them kind of, sit somewhere between the 1.5 to 2.5-minute mark. And we even have a few songs on here that clock in under a minute. But I think at times it kind of makes it a little uneven because you don't really get to settle into a certain sound for too long, because a minute later we have something else going on. First, I'm going to highlight some of the songs that I thought were the strongest. And we can get things started with the opening track, Caramelized, which switches from simple strums to an upbeat full band sound. Here she talks about the push and pull of being in a relationship. Apathy is one of the singles released from this album, and on here we get a peppy pop sound as she reflects on self, purpose, and worth. On Jessie, we get a full band sound with a very cheerful vibe, although the lyrics are talking about a breakup. On Duet, we get a softer, dreamlike quality, but also in it, there's 2 little short shifts that happen in the music that are a little trippy, as here she expresses her love for another. Accommodate is a pretty short song at 1.5 minutes, and here we get an up-tempo full band sound as she talks about yearning for being more outspoken and not being quite as accommodating. The Ballad of R&J also clocks in at 1.5 minutes, and this is a punchier number, which has a full band sound as it talks about the romance between 2 characters, Ricky and Julie. Being Alive is the lead single from this album, and on here it switches from a punchier up-tempo moment and then settles into something more relaxed. This features vocal contributions from different members of the band as they go around saying, being alive is quite a bit, even when you feel like shit. My Phone is one that clocks in at only 32 seconds and only features guitar, but here she's stating that, she's connected to people through her phone, but even if her phone were to die, she'd know that she'd still have that same connection with these people because they're true friends. And on Cafeteria, we get a peppy full band sound as she talks about her insecurities. Like I mentioned before, there's 18 songs on this album, so there's a lot to listen to. And one of them that I wanted to highlight was As Often As I Can, which is just a 1-minute song that is very dreamy. And here, I thought it was pretty sweet because she just repeats the lines, I love you so, I let you know as often as I can. And the closing track, Vessel, which is one of those that clocks in at over 3 minutes. Here, she's reminiscing about an ex. And I love the drumming on this track, which really gives the song quite a lift. Overall, I thought this was an okay release. There's definitely a lot of songs to listen to, and musically, the sound is very peppy. The drumming on here is very excellent, and also the vocal overdubs that happen here are really cool. There's a lot of nice melodies going on along with Greta's voice, but just too many tracks to kind of keep track of, and once you start liking one, it's over within the next minute and something else starts. So I think that's something that, I didn't like from this release. But despite that, I'm going to still give it a score of a 7 out of 10. So if you're interested in listening to some indie pop songs that are really short and only amount to about 33 minutes, then I recommend you give this album a listen. Next up on the show, we have the newest release from a band that's unknown to me. This is Amen Dunes, and the name of the album is Freedom. The reason I'm checking this out is because it's always fun for me to, discover something that's brand new, an artist that I've never heard of before. And doing a little bit of research, I found out that this is actually album number 5 for this band. And the principal songwriter behind the band is Damon McMahon. And it's said that he's from New York, or at least the band's from New York. And I can't really tell because his voice is very distinct. It sounds very southern to me, like he has like a southern drawl going on, which gave the music a nice little quality, but also made it a little hard to understand the lyrics at times. Vocally here, I kind of get a vibe where he's kind of doing a cross between Michael Stipe of REM and Richard Ashcroft, who was the singer for The Verb. Now, the album has an interesting opening with the intro, which has a little kid providing you with some inspiration to go and do it. Then it goes into the first song, Blue Rose, which had a nice fluidity to it. And this is one that especially reminded me of what REM was doing with the album Automatic for the People. He has a very distinct warble to his delivery, and lyrically here, it sounds to me like he's talking about a conflict between a father and his son. Time has a hypnotic quality to the music because it has like a repetitive feel to it, but it does take these slight detours from time to time, as lyrically he's saying, maybe in time there is pain, so much pain. Skipping School is one that is musically much darker in tone, with the guitar having these strokes that give off kind of like a clanking sound. Vocally on here, it's much more open and energetic, and the piano that's added later on really broadens the sound, as this is the one that really reminded me of The Verb. Calling Paul the Suffering had an interesting groove with a hard accent on the snare. This sounded a bit tropical at times, and the Hammond organ that comes in provides some pretty cool spurts. And vocally here, we find Damon very loose. Mickey Dora is the single released from this album, and here, musically, it stays very restrained, as it follows the beat for most of it, until the very end, where the guitar is given a little bit more freedom. And here, he's talking about the pride of man. On Believe, we get more of a traditional rock sound, as is led in by these clear guitars that just move along with the rest of the instruments like a machine. Lyrically here, it gets a little steamy, as he's talking about skipping all the talk and getting straight to it. Dracula is another one that feels a bit restrained, as it really just focuses on following that groove with the bass and drums. Freedom starts off very mellow with humming synths and guitar strums, as it's really carried by probably the catchiest moment on this album, as he keeps calling for freedom. And then the drums and the bass come and settle into a nice little pace. And this actually has a very exciting little detour that happens in the last minute. And then the album closes with LA, which has a mellower groove to it. But then we have the same kid from the intro come back in. And when that does, it causes a shift in the sound, where now we have a more prominent bass and a shuffle in the beat, which remains for the rest of the song. Overall, this was a pretty interesting listen. I thought that musically, it maybe stayed a little bit too restrained for me, but then when it was able to breathe, that made it a little bit more exciting, so it was nice to see. And vocally, I really enjoyed this guy's voice, despite the fact that it was hard to really understand what he was saying at times. This is going to get a score of a 7.5 out of 10 from me. So if you're in the mood for checking out some kind of moody indie rock, then I'd suggest you give this a listen. And before we close out, I do want to give you a little bonus review, seeing as how we opened up the episode with an EP. I thought it'd be fitting to close out with another EP. This comes courtesy of the label Mexican Summer, which is an indie label. They've done something pretty interesting. They have a series where they take two different people that are assigned to their label and have them do a collaborative album. This is the third time they're doing that, and now they brought together Woods, who is more of a folky band that has some psychedelic tendency as well. Kevin Morby was actually a member of this band at one point. And Dungen, who has more of that psychedelic sound. And together, they've made a pretty nice EP of psych folk. So if that's something that you're into, then I recommend you check this out. There's definitely some standout tracks on this EP, like the opening track, Loop, which gives us a nice hypnotic groove on here, where the melody is provided by a flute at times and sometimes a guitar. And this would sound right at home on any of the recent releases by the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Turn Around is a track in which we get more of the folk influence coming in with the psychedelic music, and this is one of only two tracks in which we get vocals, and the vocals on here really blend in well with the music. Morning Myth is one that provides a much looser feel with a lot of different effects, and also a vocal melody that just keeps repeating at certain points, that it almost kind of gives off like a ripple effect. And then the closing track, Just for the Taste, which has a nice slide guitar on here that gives the psychedelic more of a folk edge. And this happened to be my favorite track on this EP. So like I said before, I really enjoyed this album. This is going to get a score of a 7.5 out of 10 from me. So if you're interested with the combination of psychedelic and folk, then I recommend you check out this release. Well guys, that does it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed my reviews. If you did, make sure to leave a little comment at the bottom. And like always, if you have any recommendations of any music you want me to check out, you can leave those down there as well. And while you're there, feel free to hit the like or subscribe. On the next episode, I'm looking to talk about the newest release from Casey Musgraves. So be on the lookout